Greetings everybody, welcome. It's Macro Talk, Tuesday, let me see, January the 14th, 2085. Hope everybody's doing well and adjusting to the new year. I also hope it's warmer where you are than where I am. And I have an electric fan blowing up my trouser legs right now. If you hear a buzzing noise, that's what it is. How's everybody doing? I hope well. I'm glad to see everybody here this evening. We're going to have an interesting talk tonight. We're going to answer some questions that I am asked all the time, but have never actually addressed in a video or a live stream. And that is, when is the right time to do blank? When is the right time to buy a macro lens, or to switch to an automated rail, or to build a rig instead of the kitchen table? All of these things, I'm going to answer them for you in a way that I hope will make a lot of sense and help you kind of plan your macro journey. That's what we're talking about tonight. Thursday, I am going to clear out a couple of mailbags and answer a bunch of questions that I have been asked and haven't had a chance to respond to. So that's what we're going to do on Thursday in Macro Talk 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon. Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm not even awake at 8 o'clock in the morning. Saturday, per Zoom, followed by Tangent at 12:30. 12:30 until 2, Tangent with Larry Strunk. Per Zoom, we're going to stick to the same format we've been using, though I am going to take a little bit of time to do a little bit of planning for this coming year. If you are a winner in the recent wildcard competition, and you're waiting for your prize, yes, I'll get it to you very, very soon. The problem was I'm still waiting on one address, and that's holding me up because, well, just because. Okay, so I think that's it. Let me see. Nope, nothing else on my list. We're going to get right down to business because I've got more than an hour of talking to do. What we're talking about tonight is timing, and I left it obscure kind of to pique your interest, but it's timing for when to do certain things in your macro journey. And they're not in any particular order, but what I'm going to try to do is explain to you why you might want to upgrade to another piece of equipment, or learn a new skill, or modify something you've already got, why it's a benefit to you, what may be the possible drawbacks of doing so, and when is the best time to do it. What do you have to have in place to make it a sensible choice? Okay? So we're going to start, and these really are random, but when would you want to switch to a dedicated macro lens from whatever you're using? Diopters, extension tubes, reversing rings, stuff like that. When is it the right time? Well, the benefits are pretty straightforward. The optical quality of a true macro lens is way higher. It's really designed for zero aberration, maximum sharpness, and it's designed for using at short distances. Everything you've been using prior to that has been a workaround. So the optical quality is much better. They are much more convenient. You just put it on and you're ready to shoot, whether it's out in nature or on a rail, and you're able to shoot at 1:1, life size, and all the way out to infinity without changing your setup. It's all right there on your camera. You get better working distance. Your working distance with a macro lens is going to be considerably better than with reversed lenses and other workarounds. Some of the downsides to think about are a good macro lens, which is what you want. It's the whatever your camera brand is, the top of the line macro lens, like the 105 Nikon or the 100 Canon, the 90mm Sony. The top of the line f2.8 macro lens is expensive. It's oftentimes the most expensive in the base range of good lenses that a company makes, the full frame lenses. course, you can quickly get far beyond that with specialty lenses, but of the basic lenses, it's often the most expensive. They can be fairly heavy, though the 105 Nikon that I use now, the Micro Nikkor, is actually lighter than almost any lens I own. Fantastic, but some of them can be pretty heavy. And it can feel a little redundant. Nobody likes to have redundant equipment in their setup because it feels like you wasted your money. And if you've been using diopters or other workarounds for some period of time, when you get a macro lens, it can feel like maybe you didn't really need it because you were using the other stuff. But you know, if you use it for a short period of time, you'll realize why it's so important. So what conditions need to be in place before you are willing to put $1,000 out on a good macro lens? Well, if you consistently find yourself disappointed in the performance of your close-up photography, if your images are just not as sharp as you want them to be, and you've done everything you can with your extension tubes and reversed lenses, you recognize the limitations when it comes to image quality and convenience, and they're starting to bother you, or you have the money to spend on it. You win the lottery or something, and you've got $1,000 to spend, then that clears away the barriers right there. So if you're unhappy with your photography and the inconvenience of having to use lenses on lenses or reversed lenses or extension tubes, now's the time to buy one. Really, I've said this before as well, the time to buy a macro lens is when you're seriously interested in starting macro photography. There really isn't any better way to do it. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, and it's much easier to use. What about a manual focusing rail? When is it time to blow your savings on a manual focusing rail? Well, the truth is manual focusing rails, even quite good ones, are not that expensive. And the very best manual focusing rail that I've ever used, which is from Novaflex, is only the price of it's the price of an automated rail. But yeah, we won't worry about that. But you can get a good one for $100, a really good one for $2. So why would you want to get one? It gives you precise focusing control, allowing you to move the camera or the subject in tiny, reproducible increments, which is what you have to focus stack. And that's absolutely crucial. It allows for consistent framing of your subject too. Once you're on a rail, it holds everything steady. You're able to avoid shifts in perspective when you're trying to do focus stacking. And ergonomically, it's a lot easier than trying to shift your camera any other way, manually. And certainly it's more accurate than using the focus ring. Possible downsides of using a manual rail: a learning curve. You have to learn how to use it. You have to learn how to control it in increments that are usable at 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. In some cases, if you're very, very good with a manual rail, you can get good results at 5-to-1. It's pretty hard to get much better than that because the increments these things move are just not quite small enough. It can be time consuming. Remember, if you're doing a stack of 100 photographs and you're using a manual rail, you're sitting there moving the rail every time, which also adds to the likelihood you're going to nudge it out of line, or you're going to make steps that are too long or too short. There's really no way to control it unless you have a Novaflex rail. So it can be time consuming and a little bit frustrating. But let me tell you this, I did macro photography at relatively high magnifications for almost 10 years with a manual rail. So it can be done. It adds weight to your gear if you're planning on using it out in the field, but that's a minor consideration. The things that probably need to be in place before you buy one of these things: you regularly shoot small stuff. If you only shoot small stuff once a year, and it's one small thing, you probably don't need any rail. You can probably muddle through. But if you're consistently shooting smaller things, or if you become interested through a group like this in experimenting more, then that's a good time to do it. If you're noticing in your photographs that you have areas that are out of focus when you're trying to focus stack by hand, then definitely manual rail will help you get control of that. And you have to have some kind of a setup that will hold your manual rail sturdy. Don't just buy a manual rail and stick it on your table and expect it not to move. Having a sturdy tripod or a camera stand or a platypod or something like that will help you enormously, so you need to have something like that before you invest in the rail. When is it time to upgrade to a mechanical focusing rail? I mean, an automated focusing rail, a stack shot, or a NovaFlex. When do you do that? Well, when you need more precision and more repeatability, which almost always means when you need higher magnification. They move in minute increments, these automated rails. The stack shot was the first one I got. I have several now, but the stack shot was where I began, and it's able to give you roughly a micron of movement with each step. That means you can easily use a 20x objective and get pictures that have no focus banding. So it gives you precision, it gives you repeatability. It's also incredibly efficient because you're not sitting there doing it. It does it while you go off and do other stuff. You set it up and it is programmed to do the whole stack, all of your shots. Many of them have advanced features which will help you make it even less time intensive on you. Most of the modern rails come with a good controller that allows you to do just about everything. The downside, the number one downside, is the cost. For most of us, the cost of another macro lens is pretty daunting, and that's why, you know, for many years I didn't get one. I couldn't afford it, and you know, I was getting really good with a manual rail, so I felt that it wasn't that necessary. But you've got to bear in mind the fact that these things can cost you $600, $700, $800 for a basic stack shot. We macro, $300, and that's for a fully equipped one with the controller and everything. NovaFlex is more expensive. They're also nicer looking, quieter, smoother, less prone to some of the problems you have with the stack shot. Really accurate, lovely to use. So yeah, think about the cost. They're a little bit complex in that if you're not a computer type person, you're not familiar with machines, you might have a bit of trouble figuring out how to operate it, and you do need to learn that. You need to take the time to take a lesson or watch a video or talk to somebody about how to do it right. You also need to understand how to calculate step lengths, how to use step calculators and all these things. So there is a learning curve with it. And they require power. Unlike the manual rails, you need to be close to an outlet. So using them outdoors means investing in battery packs and things like that, or solar panels, I guess. But there's some of the downsides. The things you probably should have in place before you decide to get one: you know how to focus stack, and you have done at least some manually, either with a rail, a manual rail, or with the focus ring on your camera. You just need more precision, or you want more magnification. It's beyond your ability to do it, you know, at 10x, and you need something to do it for you. So if you've mastered manual rails and you're wasting time, or you're having focus banding in your pictures, you just need more consistency. Yeah, absolutely. If you're planning on doing anything in the commercial world, get an automated rail right away. So if you're doing work that is commercial or scientific and you need reliable repeatable, consistent results, yeah, it justifies the cost. Go ahead and get one. Okay, when do you need to invest in specialized macro lighting? By macro lighting, I mean ring lights or twin flashes or LED panels that are off camera, a set of MF12s, things like that. Well, pretty much as soon as you decide you want to do macro photography. It gives you controlled lighting. It allows you to reduce shadows on a smaller scale than most lighting does, and allows you to really work with the aperture and depth of field to get the shot the way you want it, and controlling all of the light on a small scale. You can't do that with studio lights. You can't do that with global lighting or outdoors. When you need to control all the light in your studio, that's the time to think about macro flash. When you have fast moving insects, flying insects, and you absolutely have to capture the instant that they fly by, flash is going to help, and using macro flash just gives you more versatility in where you position it. You get more ability to be flexible when you have a lighting system designed for flash. Even if it's a fixed system like a ring light, it often allows you to vary the intensity on either side of the ring. If it's on bendy arms, of course, you can position them separately and change the intensity. So highly configurable or flexible. Downsides, some specialized macro lighting is expensive. Some of it's very expensive. Things like the R1C1 from Nikon, terribly expensive, terribly good. Some of them are in the middle of the road, like the MF12 system that I use from Godox. They are not cheap, at $100 or so a piece for each light. If you have 4 or 6 lights plus a controller, it gets up there. It's not that far off the price for the Nikon. And there are cheaper alternatives, definitely, several of them. And they're all good to the extent that you properly diffuse them and learn how to use them. They all have a learning curve, which can be a bit of a drawback for some people learning how to use new stuff. They all require diffusers, and you have to work with them to figure out how to use them right. So these are all possible downsides. You sometimes need additional gear like bendy arms, brackets, frames, all kinds of things to attach the lights to. So sometimes there are some hidden costs to it as well. So think about that. The things you should have in place before you plump down a bunch of money for specialized macro lighting is if you frequently are running into problems with macro lighting. If your single on-camera flash is giving you specular highlights and glary pictures and you don't like it, it's time to think about improving your lighting. If you've tried continuous light and natural light, but you find it too difficult to use with moving subjects or flying insects, then you need to consider macro lighting. It also helps before you spend a lot of money on a special macro setup if you understand flash and how to use it on a bigger scale. Most people who transition into macro do know how to use flash, and it's pretty straightforward to switch over. Having a specialized macro lighting setup as your first flash kit might be challenging. Would be challenging. All right. What about advanced diffusion and homemade light modifiers? When do you need those things? Well, why do you need them in the first place? Because they give you nice, soft, even diffused light. They tend to reduce hotspots and glare, and with reflective insects, they can take enough of the reflection out that you don't need to use polarized light. You can customize the things. If you're making them yourself, you can do anything, literally. And you can use just about any materials that you can think of to build them and put a piece of mylar or tracing paper in front of them. I built hundreds of the things, literally. and they are easy to customize. Using diffuser gives you any kind of diffusion that's well thought out, gives you more detail, more pleasing looking images. It smooths everything out just a little bit and helps show textures better than you could without it. And most important, it gets rid of specular highlights. So there are not that many downsides to investing in some kind of diffusion system. You have to figure out how to use it. If that's a downside, you have to use trial and error to get through a period of trying it and seeing what works. It can add a fair amount of bulk to your camera. I keep looking up there to the left where my AK diffuser is, and that is an example of adding bulk to the camera. Even lightweight diffusion setups can get a bit unwieldy if there's a breeze in the field. It can be a little difficult until you get used to it to get consistency with your photographs. If you're using a diffusion system and you're not quite used to it yet, you can kind of get a range of exposures on your photographs even when your flash is set right or your continuous light is set right. So you need to learn how to use it. When do you need to think about upgrading to a dedicated diffusion system for your macro lights? If you just find yourself dealing in post with so many reflections and glare on your subjects, it's obviously then time that you need to do it. If you're comfortable with flash but not comfortable with the results you're getting, the next thing you need to do is add diffusion. Though it really is, you should do it at the same time you get the flash. And if you have enough time and you're willing to invest the time in building and making DIY diffusers, if that's what you want to do. All right. What about when is it time to upgrade from a low resolution type sensor to a high megapixel sensor? When is it time to go from 24 megapixels to 45 or 53 or whatever? Well, this goes hand in hand with the question of when is it time to switch to a full frame sensor, or is it ever time to do that? But I'm going to cover that concept later. We're talking now specifically about a larger number of megapixels. Is that something that you should switch to, and if so, when? Well, you do get more detail that allows you to crop in, and in macro you often have to do that. You're often photographing subjects that are a little bit beyond the comfortable range, and you need to crop them in. And if you have a higher megapixel camera, providing that the megapixels reflect also the size of the photo sites and everything, we're not just talking about megapixels like in a cell phone that are layered one on top of the other, but if you're talking about an actual higher resolution sensor, if you want more detail, if you're planning on printing or duplicating, it helps for high resolution images to have more pixels. It really does at the end of the day, again with a couple of caveats. Most of the modern sensors that have high pixel counts also have large photo sites, and they tend to have considerably better dynamic range, which is helpful in macro because you're oftentimes dealing with some deep shadows and shiny highlights. So having a modern high-res sensor does give you some improved low light performance as well as other things. Cost is the biggest problem. I mean, high-res sensor cameras are expensive. We were talking just the other day about the Sony, what is it, the A7 III, I think it was that, or A7 IX or A9 7, I can't remember, but it was a Sony and it was thousands of dollars, 4,000, 6,000, can't remember, awfully expensive. The file sizes can be ginormous with these cameras, and if you don't have the equipment, the computer equipment at home to deal with it, you might want to think about that before you invest in the camera, because these files can be huge, and when you're focus stacking, it gets ridiculous how much space you'll use. You need to make sure, if you're buying a high resolution a camera with a huge sensor and large number of megapixels, that you also have lenses that can do it justice. If your lenses are inexpensive, low resolution lenses and you stick them on this camera, you're going to get bad pictures. You need to match the camera to the lens, and that can be a downside if you hadn't thought about that and have to go out and buy better lenses. The conditions before you plump down the money on a high resolution body: if you frequently print large macro pictures, for example, where you need the finest detail you can get, if you have a camera body now that has 8 megapixels and you're just not getting the resolution you need, you probably need to think about upgrading. And as long as you have lenses and the rest of your equipment will support having a high resolution sensor, then I think it's okay to think about buying one. Of course, you've got to have some money too. When is it time to switch to tethering or switch to software that will allow you to tether? This is an interesting one. Tethering is really cool because it gives you real-time feedback. You can actually see your focus and composition, and you can put it on a larger screen in real time and make adjustments. You can make really accurate adjustments, and you can see all the problems before they become problems in a bigger stack. Most of the workflows with tethering are very convenient. Allows you to immediately manage and stack the images and put them in a workflow that's very simple and straightforward once you learn it. Downsides: tethering systems can be a little complicated to set up the first time, whether you're using cables or wireless solutions. It's probably easiest to go, if you're going to tether, go with a laptop computer and cables. That tends to be faster, easier to set up, less complex. There are real limitations to tethering in the field. If you're doing mostly field photography, yeah, it's probably not a smart move ever. I mean, if you get really proficient with tethering in the studio, then I would think about tethering in the field, but I wouldn't learn how to tether to take it in the field. Too complicated. There is a fairly steep learning curve on using tethering software. Take that into account. It can be a little tricky depending on the brand you're using, and you'll run into all kinds of little technical snafus. If that's not your kind of thing, then yeah, you might want to think about it. When would you want to switch to tethering? If you shoot mostly indoors in your studio in a controlled environment, then it's worth thinking about, even if you decide not to do it. I do not tether, not currently, not in quite a while. I have a workflow where I use memory cards, and it doesn't appear to be significantly less productive than tethering ever was. But that might not be the case for you. If your pictures are of such critical importance that you need to analyze them in real time because your time is absolutely critical, then tethering might be a good way for you to look at pictures before you start stacking them at full size. That I loved having that. I just didn't find many other benefits to it. But if you already need to have a decent laptop and some tethering equipment before you start. Otherwise, you need to bear in mind you're going to have to buy it. All right. When do you buy Xerine, or what's the other one called? Helicon. I knew that. I was pretending. So when do you buy a subscription to Helicon or Xerine? This is probably the one I'm asked more than any other. What are the benefits? Well, obviously, you can focus stack when you have these things. That's what they're made for. It allows you to take images of macro subjects at full size with everything in focus, if that's what you're looking for. You get really professional looking results that people will drool over, which is nice. And it allows you to integrate your workflow into everything else you do in your editing. So you can figure out ways that you can use Lightroom and Photoshop with your Zerine, for example, to get a workflow that really flows and saves you time and effort. There are downsides, but they're not particularly far down. Price is one, but neither of these programs are expensive. And a lifetime license for Zerine is about a fifth the price of a macro lens, and you'll have it forever. I'm not sure that cost really should be an issue at all here, because it saves you so much time and so much sweat. There is a learning curve. You can learn how to use either of these programs in 10 minutes. It takes a while, maybe a few months, to learn how to use them properly and well, how to use the retouching features. They are not simple programs. They're fairly straightforward when you understand the concept, but it does take a while to learn them, and you may want to consider that. If you're going to buy a program for focus stacking, you need to first have a system of consistent lighting. You cannot have lighting that changes during shooting a stack. I see people spend money to buy a program for focus stacking. They buy it and then they're disappointed with the results, but they never bought any lights. So their lighting was constantly changing and the pictures were suffering from it. So you do need to understand lighting and focus stacking before you invest in the program. Before you buy Zerine or Helicon, you probably should have given at least a try to Photoshop or in-camera stacking if you're who is it who makes us a Fuji user. I think Fuji has in-camera the OM. No, is that Fuji? The OM1? No, that's Olympus. If you have the OM1 system, you do in-camera focus stacking and you're not happy with it, then it's time for you to think about getting a real stacking program. Same if you've used Photoshop, which is a rudimentary stacking program. It's not really designed for macro stacking. It's designed for landscape stacking and things like that. If you routinely shoot subjects where you need focus stacking, just get a subscription to, not a subscription, buy Zerine or Helicon. You just need to get one of them if you're routinely shooting deep stacks. If you're willing to learn the software is the other thing. Don't go into it thinking it's going to be plug and play. It's really not. You have to learn how to use it to get the most out of it. So be willing to do that before you buy it. All right. Let's say you bought a macro lens and now you're trying to decide when to invest in a set of bellows or extension tubes to do higher magnification than you can do with your macro lens. This is more common these days than it used to be. When I was coming along, most people would start out with the extension tubes and bellows before they got a good macro lens, but these days it's the other way around. So when do you want to add the expense of rails and platforms and bellows and extension tubes to get higher magnification? It gives you a lot more versatility when you do this. When you add these things, inexpensive extension tubes or a cheap set of used bellows turns a standard lens, when you flip it around backwards, into a fairly versatile multi-magnification macro lens. They have their problems, but it gives you a lot of ability to shoot at different magnifications. To this day, my preference for shooting subjects where I want to shoot close in and a little further back is to use a reversed enlarger lens on bellows. That's still my number one choice. And I have macro lenses and objectives of all kinds that I could use, but what I'd rather do is use that combination. It's fairly lightweight, easy to mount in the studio. It's certainly not something I would really want to do outdoors, but in the studio it doesn't take up any extra space. And it's a good bit cheaper than buying, say, what's it called? I forget, the Canon. Yes, the Canon lens that you can change the magnification on. Why am I blanking on that name? Also, no, I'm blanking on that one too. Cheaper than those. I mean, a Bellows, a good used Bellows like a Nikon PB6 will cost you $200. That's in good condition. A PB5 will often cost considerably less than that. I've seen them for $100. You can even buy cheap domestic Bellows, or Chinese, I should say, Bellows that are brand new for under $100. They're also terrible, but it's not that big an investment. Very cost effective. Tubes, and you don't need tubes that connect the camera to the lens. You just need plain extension tubes. Are dirt cheap. You can buy several sets of them for under $100, 3 sets easily, and get as much magnification as you want. The downsides with using Bellows and extension tubes is you lose a bit of light. Also, you're moving a lens a long way from the sensor, so you tend to increase the likelihood of diffraction. You create an effective aperture that's considerably smaller than the aperture you have set on the lens. You need to think about that. The working distance gets pretty short as you add extension, and under any circumstances you're going to be limited by how much extension you can add before diffraction becomes a problem. There is a reason we have microscope objectives, and that is because camera lenses work only up to a point. Beyond that point, maybe 3.5 or 4x, you're going to have so much diffraction that it's not worth it. And then you need to invest in something more reliable, like a microscope objective. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So you get some issue with stability and focus with one of these systems when you're using a Bellows. It is fairly bulky. It does sit fairly high on your rail, and it does have a tendency to wobble a little bit. This shouldn't bother you if you think it out, or if you use extension tubes in a very long setup on an indexing rail with multiple clamps. But if you're trying to balance a Bellows on a single quick release clamp, it can cause problems. So bear that in mind. Before you plunk down the money for some extension tubes, a 50mm lens to reverse, and a reversing ring, you probably want to be sure that you're interested in high magnification photography. And there really aren't many ways to do that other than taking the plunge. I mean, you really are at the point here where you're thinking of going from 1:1 to higher. It's good to know that you're really interested in it. But then again, it's not that expensive. If you're not, you can end up selling them or using them for something else. You need to understand the trade-offs in using extension systems like these, and be willing to accept the fact that you're going to run into diffraction eventually. And you have to have a stable setup, whether it's a sturdy kitchen table or a specially built macro stand. You have to have stability. Once you start getting into these greater than 1:1 magnification scenarios, you need something stable, or you are going to be frustrated with motion blur. Okay? Now, when is it a good time to buy a specialty macro lens? Now we're talking about the 2.5 to 5x lenses, the new one by another name I can't remember, the 2 to 5x, or the Canon lens, MPE 65. I knew it would come to me eventually. When is it worth buying one of those? Or for that matter, a tilt shift macro lens, any kind of really expensive macro lens, when is it time? Well, when you want to go beyond 1:1. If you want 2:1, for example, then you're going to have to get either a different setup or a lens that will go that high. If you want tilt or shift control, you're going to have to do that, or buy an adapter, which is actually what I did to save some money. But some of them, of course, come with tilt or shift. Remember what I said about optical quality with macro lenses. These macro lenses are, generally speaking, much higher quality than the things you're going to get with cobbled together systems, and that's nice. The MPE65 is a very nice lens. It's discontinued though. They don't make that anymore. The Laowa 2.5 to 5 is readily available, reasonably affordable, and has fantastic images. It's just very, very difficult to use handheld. Downsides would be the cost, $400 for the Laowa, probably $600 for a used MPE 65. I'm not sure, I've never priced them. Tilt shift, they can be expensive, and some of them are hard to use. I would argue that of all of the Laowa lenses I've used, except maybe the Oregon, the 2.5 to 5 is the hardest to use as an everyday macro lens. I think it needs to be used on a tripod. It needs to be used with extra light, and yeah, it's difficult to learn. So you need to bear that in mind. They do have a steep learning curve, and bear in mind that just because this lens goes to 5x, whichever of these lenses you're talking about, they don't somehow skirt the whole issue of diffraction. You still have to deal with that. Even though the lens is small and fits on your camera, you still have a diffraction limitation in that the images are going to be soft when the effective aperture gets up in the 30s any way you cut it, and that's what I experienced with these lenses. But yeah, it's just something you need to bear in mind. When you're ready to switch to a lens like that is probably when you've already mastered using a regular 1:1 macro lens. If you're looking for higher magnification but you're comfortable shooting at 1:1, then it's probably reasonable to go with something more challenging. If you just can't get the level of magnification you want with any of the systems that you have, this then becomes one of the options to consider. If you are comfortable working slowly, using a tripod or a platform, doing your shooting in the studio, just if you are comfortable with the whole idea of operating slowly and deliberately, then I think it's reasonable for you to think about getting one of these lenses. If you're thinking that it's going to be a really cool way to run and gun at 5x, forget about it. You're going to be disappointed. You're not ready for it because you can't do it. I couldn't do it. You can probably, but I couldn't. All right, so what about going from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera, something that I resisted for a long time? What are the advantages of a mirrorless camera? The EVF, electronic viewfinder. What you see is what you get. You're seeing exactly what's going to show up on your photograph, and that includes focus peaking, and it allows you to magnify the image. That is a big benefit. Most mirrorless cameras, including my mirrorless camera, are less bulky and less heavy than the equally advanced DSLR. My D850 weighs more and feels bulkier than the Z8 by quite a bit. The mirrorless camera's silent shooting, which in macro photography can be very, very useful out in the field, and it has advanced autofocus systems that I mean they all do. All the mirrorless upgrades are better focusing than the old DSLR equivalents. somebody will say no, that there are exceptions to that, but I find them really superior in low light. When I'm trying to work in low light, the mirrorless is just incredible. Probably the biggest benefit of mirrorless for me is the fact that there is no mirror. There is no mirror to slap up inside the camera when I'm doing focus stacking. I'm on a rail. There is no need for me to slow down between shots, and if I'm using continuous light, I can go shot, 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 shot like that all the way through 400 images and not slow down, and the lights will keep up with it, and you just cut half your day out of standing by the camera waiting for it to finish. I love it. Mirrorless is the way to go. There's a cost. Now, upgrading to a mirrorless system now is probably not as big a deal. Well, it's definitely not as big a deal as it was a few years ago. Nowadays, there's parity between the top of the line mirrored cameras and the top of the line mirrorless. So you can switch without much trouble. The problem that you need to think about is, what about all your lenses? Are you going to have to switch to Z lenses? I don't have any Z lenses, and I have a Z camera, but I have an adapter, and that will do for the time being. But think about that. You've got to consider the lenses. Mirrorless cameras go through batteries, unlike most DSLRs. Having said that, my D850 would go through batteries at least as fast as my Z8, but some of the other cameras definitely, they chew through more power. Not been a problem for me. There are learning curves whenever you switch cameras, so switching from DSLR to mirrorless means you have to learn the new system, but generally speaking, it's a pleasure and it's well worth it. So not really too much in the way of downsides. The things you need to think about that would prompt you to upgrade would be, if you're missing shots because your autofocus is no good, or your clicky mirror is slowing your studio shooting down so much you're falling asleep during a shoot. Yeah, think about a mirrorless. If you've budgeted not just for a camera but also for a couple of lenses, maybe a macro lens, then you're probably ready to switch. I would avoid spending your last few pennies on a mirrorless camera, which will sit there until you can afford the mirrorless lenses. Kind of think about the big picture when you're doing it. And another condition would be, if your desire for having an electronic viewfinder and real-time focus aids and everything is something that you can adapt to quickly, if you've already dabbled in that, for example, with other cameras, then you're probably ready to switch. It was very new to me, and at first I didn't like the EVF. I'd be hard put to get by without it right now. All right, when is the time to move your macro gear off the kitchen table? Don't ask your wife or husband the answer to this question, but when is it time to move it to a dedicated platform somewhere else, in the workshop, in the basement? Well, the reason you'd want to do it is consistency and stability, and because of the people eating the breakfast around you at the table when you're trying to shoot insects. So you get considerably less vibration the minute you move off a regular table to do your work. And generally speaking, the tables we do our macro on at first are tables in the busiest rooms in the house. Vibration, vibration, vibration. They are more efficient. You are more efficient. Your setup is more efficient when it has its own dedicated space, and you're not trying to like serve breakfast and check the mail and do your macro photography on the same surface. If you're doing any kind of commercial work, or if you're doing any kind of product work where you need a stable platform, then you probably should be thinking about getting a dedicated one. Downsides would be the cost and the space. These days, not many people have a lot of extra space that they can dedicate to this. So, that can be a downside. Most rigs don't have to be that expensive. My first few rigs were very, very inexpensive, and I built them in videos on this channel. The ones I have now are a little bit more pricey, but they're also a lot more stable. So think about the cost. They are not portable. Anybody who says they have a nice portable macro setup in their basement doesn't know what portable means. It needs to be heavy and on a solid base, and it doesn't need to move. You don't need to be able to move it. It's going to stay there. The more portable it is, the more vibration prone it is. The setup can be a little complex. I've helped a lot of people over the years set up macro platforms that were dedicated, and sometimes if you're adding any automation or additional moving parts or work lights, this type of thing, it can take a little bit of DIY knowledge to do. The things that need to be in place, if you have been doing any significant amount of work in the studio, the kitchen, and you're running into any of those problems I talked about earlier, then you should be thinking about getting a dedicated space. If you're spending half the time improvising ways to hold the lights up off the table, if you're doing that instead of taking pictures, get a dedicated setup. Just build one, because you're wasting time and effort in trying to work around it on the kitchen table. And of course you need to have a suitable space that you can do it in, and preferably one with solid walls and a concrete floor and not much traffic, and above 47 degrees Kelvin is a high recommendation of mine. So think about those things. What about the timing to buy your first microscope objective? If you've got specialty lenses, you've got a couple of them, and you're doing 5x with your Canon lens, when's a good time to buy a microscope objective? Okay, well, you want to do magnifications above 4x. If you want to do anything at 20x or 50x, you have to have a microscope objective. You can't do it without it. When you're looking for the highest possible optical performance at the magnification you're interested in, and it's over about 4x, you need a microscope objective, because there is no other way to get that kind of quality. You need the design and build of a quality microscope objective to give you pictures at magnifications above 4 or 5x. If you are planning on using your photography in any kind of scientific or commercial application, don't even think about using any kind of extended lenses, especially hyper extended lenses where you're stretching them out with extension tubes and shooting at 10x with a 50mm camera lens. You can't do that for commercial photography. You're going to have far too much aberration and diffraction. So think about getting objectives. Downsides, they can be a little complicated to set up, but once you've set up one, especially an infinity corrected objective, once you've figured out how to do it once, you've figured it out forever for all of them. It's really not that bad. Once you have the right adapters, you understand how to use the rails, and you have good lighting, you're set. Working distance can be a real problem with microscope objectives. You don't just want to buy any microscope objective you see online, because most of them are made primarily for use on a microscope and may have a working distance of a fraction of a millimeter. You want to get lenses that are designed for extra long working distance use, like Mitutoyos and some of the Nikons. Lots of lenses are made with long, extra long, or super long, I think they call it, working distances of 10, 15, 20, even 30 millimeters, like the 5x Mitutoyo. That is more than enough room to get light in. But think about it, because working distance can be very short, especially on some of these budget lenses that you can buy. The jury is still out on the Shibuya because they haven't arrived. Yeah, I'll tell you more about that later. There is a steep learning curve in just about every aspect of using objectives, as far as lighting, the camera system, the extension tubes, but post production. The pictures are different than what you'll get with a camera lens oftentimes, and dealing with all of these things, it's a learning curve. Bear it in mind, but it shouldn't stop you from getting one. When you want to get an objective is when you've mastered just about everything else that we do at lower magnifications, and you just have to get into smaller bugs, tighter shots on bigger bugs, and you've run out of magnification. That's the main reason that you will do it. You understand the problems that you're going to face. A lot of people will plonk down a couple of grand on a really, really nice microscope objective without thinking about the problems I just mentioned, the difficulties in getting beyond that steep learning curve. And you have to have all of the support systems to use one. In other words, you have to have a good automated focusing rail. You cannot buy an objective and expect to get much use out of it with a manual rail. It might work at 5x for some shots, but you really should have macro lighting, a rail, a good camera, high resolution sensor, that type of thing. All right. You following me? We're out of time almost. I've got 5 minutes. I only had one, well, I had two more. Which one should I do? Moving from magnifying glasses to a dissecting microscope was the next one. Yeah, let's do that one. And then I won't tell you the one that we're going to miss at the end. It's, when to buy a compound microscope. Let's skip over that one. Moving from your magnifying glasses to a dissecting scope. What does that give you? Well, a much better picture, much clearer stereo picture. It gives you three-dimensional view of your subject that you're looking at. It gives you a higher magnification range. Magnifying glasses have one range, whatever it's magnifying at. You need to be able to change it if you want to get really useful imagery from it. You can set up a camera to it more easily than you can take a picture through a magnifying glass. And probably the most important thing, it's comfortable to use. It's hands-free. You look through it, you have your hands free. You can do your cleaning, your positioning, your pinning, everything, where you used to have one hand on your magnifying glass. Even if you have a bendy magnifying glass, they're not the same. This is a very solid way to image things that are too small for you to work with otherwise. They are expensive, period. Yes, a good one is expensive. I use an MZ6 that's probably 40 years old. It's been used by many people before me. It's been through several hands. It was cleaned up and refurbished, and I bought it for $2,000. Well, that's not true. I didn't buy it. It was $2,000 when I acquired it. Don't ask. And $2,000 is about right for an MZ6. Even now, years later, that's still what they cost. Is it worth $2,000? Absolutely, absolutely, it's worth it. Most of them have limited ability to take photographs with them. Mine is not trinocular, but it came with an adapter that I was able to use to shoot video and pictures. But you need to think about that. Not all of them do. And they're bulky, they're heavy, and if you get one on a stand, they take up all of your desk space. So think about that. Don't buy one if you don't have room for it. If you're using a jeweler's loupe because you have no room on your desk, this will not work for you. Before you buy one, you need to be sure you're looking at enough small things to make it worthwhile. If you're not cleaning insects or prepping little flowers or whatever it is you're doing for your macro photography, or you're not interested in pond scum, you probably don't need one. But if you need a stable platform to do some occasional imaging, shoot some occasional video, or to prep things for photography that are too small to do otherwise, yeah, it's time to think about getting one. And you need to be prepared to invest some money, like I say, a couple of grand. We're done. I'm not going to go over the last couple because they were somewhat redundant, but we covered most of them. And these are all things that I think most people are going to want to think about as they go through their macro experience. I see that Zeno and a couple of other people have asked me questions about timing of purchases. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through, strip all of those questions out, and they will be the first questions I answer on Thursday, okay? Because that's what I'm doing on Thursday, is mailbox, and this is mail. So I'm going to read through all these. Any comments that I have, come on Thursday and you'll hear me address them. But in the meantime, it is 9 o'clock exactly, and I'm done. So my voice is starting to disappear. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was useful. Thank you for coming. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Can you do that? Or I think you can, yes. And I will see you on Thursday or Saturday afternoon. I'm going to be here a lot this week. Until then, take care, stay safe, and be well. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And let me make copies of all of these questions. See you on Thursday.